Good evening, everyone. My name is John Eckstrom, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Shelter, Inc. I'd like to welcome all of you this evening for our panel discussion about the movie The Invisible Class and also homelessness in general. I'd like to introduce our panelists this evening. We have Melissa Jones, who is the Executive Director of BARHII, the Bay Area Regional Health Inequities Initiative. We have Don LaBar, who's the Manager of Homeless Services for the City of Fairfield, and Chuck Timm, who has been a longtime City Council member for the City of Fairfield. I'd like to talk a little bit to begin with, just to introduce Shelter, Inc. and our role in the regional homeless crisis that we're all experiencing. Shelter, Inc. was incorporated in 1986. We are what is known as a full service agency. And by that, I mean we provide a wide variety of services in housing. We operate low-income affordable housing for people who make less than the median income within their communities, typically 30%, 50%, and about 65% of the median income. We also operate a large amount of permanent supportive housing. That is for people who get into that housing have either mental or physical disabilities. There's another service model called rapid rehousing, and that's where we help people get a home, typically apartments, and the apartment is in their name, and we provide housing subsidies to get them into their home as well as help to sustain them, typically up to a year. During that time, we help them increase their income so they can be self-sufficient. We operate today 3 navigation centers, and I'll differentiate that from a homeless shelter. Most homeless shelters are in by 6 p.m., out by 6 a.m., and no services. We don't believe in warehousing people. Our goal is to get them to be self-sufficient and safely housed. So we provide all the wraparound services that we have available for us, and we collaborate heavily in the community with other agencies to fill in the additional wraparound services that we may not offer. We also have a prevention program. These are for people who are at risk of becoming homeless. Typically, it's a 1 or 2 month subsidy to help pay their rent because they've had a one-time financial crisis. We also serve quite a few subpopulations. Obviously, being a homeless provider, we serve chronically homeless individuals, but we also serve situationally homeless. We get a lot of families that are situationally homeless. They're still working, their kids are in schools, but something's happened where they need a safe place to stay until they can get their next housing option. We also serve survivors of domestic violence. We are a VSP, which stands for Victim Service Provider. We have multiple veterans programs, several programs for the formerly incarcerated, and of course, people with disabilities, as I mentioned before, with the permanent supportive housing. In fiscal year 2021, we served approximately 6,000 people, and about 40% of those were children. So homelessness is not just the people you see at the end of your off-ramp or sleeping in front of doorways. We have a real epidemic of children and families who are homeless. In terms of the pandemic, because of our breadth of services, over the last roughly year and a half, we've served over 10,000 people with COVID rent relief. These are people that applied to us. We were fortunate enough to get funding from a wide variety of not only government sources, but foundations that have helped us with that. We also opened up 2 of the state's Project Room Key sites, and those were for homeless people to get them out of those crowded shelters and off the streets so that they would not be either getting or transmitting COVID. And we were proud to do that. Both of those now that most all of them have been vaccinated, have been moved into either other shelters or permanent housing. And one last thing I want to talk about in terms of COVID is people of color have twice the rate of job loss and having a relative or a close friend contracting COVID compared to our white population. So it's another one of the things in our society that's inordinately impacted certain populations that we have. So homeless people have several things in common, and probably the biggest drivers, everybody thinks of substance use, alcohol, mental health issues. While those are prevalent, the biggest drivers of homelessness are lack of income and the shortage of housing stock. In California, we're about 3 million units of housing short, and especially affordable housing. And California also has 27% of the nation's homeless. So let's move on, and I'll pose our first question. If any of you in the audience have questions, please put it in the chat, and we'll respond to those either as we go or towards the end of the questions we've already set up. Are our panelists ready? Okay, here's a real good one, and I'm going to toss it to Chuck. So we've all seen the movie and the tragedy in people's lives. If we were to write a sequel to the movie, what would we be doing as a society to help the people that we saw, and obviously all the others that we see on the streets every day, to help them become permanently housed?
John, thanks, and good evening. Probably the first thing that I would say is you watch the movie and it starts off and it's a cold, wintry day, and they're, I think, in Denver, and they're what we call rousting a homeless encampment, which is ironically in the middle of town on a sidewalk, and they start telling them to bag up their tents and it's time to go. Well, that was about 10 years ago. Where do they go? So you fast forward now to today, because you notice in the movie, there was nothing there. There were no options there for them. And today we can provide options. That's probably one of the biggest takeaways from then and today are options. And more importantly, a recognition that it's expensive. If you don't do it, we're going to stay where we have been since probably the mid 80s, and the problem is just growing exponentially. But we give them options, we give them hope, and we give them a place to live.
So I'll move on to Don LaBar. Can you describe what some of those options are that Chuck was referring to?
I'd be glad to. And I'm fortunate enough that I get to work with such a really comprehensive partnership here at the city of Fairfield, including our city leadership here, that really gets the value of the diversity of services that are needed, because it isn't a one size fits all. It isn't a cookie cutter approach. And John, you know that probably better than anyone in the work that you do. So I can speak for the city of Fairfield anyway, and with the leadership of our city council, particularly in the last year, we've been really able to build on that sort of continuum so that we can provide those different opportunities of services. And they range anywhere from a baby step of a tent that's in a parking lot, but at least it's not, you know, unsheltered. And it's an opportunity again for them to be getting case management and meals and hopefully then moving along. It's transitional housing with, again, with, you know, with that case management and wraparound services. And then it's pallet shelters. And it is, of course, our great partnership with Shelter Solano that has really made a significant and really impactful improvement here in Fairfield with all of the services that brings. Because we know that you can't just put a roof over someone's head and walk away. It has to be really addressing the root of why they got to where they were if we're really going to permanently address it. And it's that full comprehensive programmatic charge that you bring to it, particularly at Shelter Solano, that is really making that difference and what we need for that continuum.
Thank you, Don. I appreciate that. There was an audience question about the number of children that we serve. I said it's about 40%. That's over all 3 counties that we operate in. The largest percentage, of course, is in Contra Costa, just because we've been around almost 35 years. We've operated Shelter Solano for about 2.5 years, but we started housing people about 1.5 years before that with our rapid rehousing program. So I would say in our rapid rehousing program in Solano, we serve all of Solano County with these programs. It's probably about the 40% rate. At Shelter Solano, we house not only single men and single women, but also families. So that rate is much, much less because the vast majority of folks there are single men. So it's probably closer to maybe upwards of 10% just in the shelter. But certainly with our rapid rehousing program, it hits around that average. So thank you, audience, for the question. Keep them coming. Melissa, good to see you again. So we're writing this sequel to the movie The Invisible Class. So I know you know a lot about the social determinants of health. So can you explain what that is and how it impacts our homeless populations?
Sure.
And perhaps what we can do about it to write the sequel to the movie.
Yes, thank you. So I'm the executive director of BARHII. We're the coalition of the Bay Area's governmental public health departments, and we focus on all those things that impact health that happen outside the doctor's office. And so there's been a lot of research over a number of years about the ways community conditions, living conditions impact not only health and disease and disease burdens, but also life expectancy. And what we know is that safe, stable, affordable housing is a really strong predictor of health. It's the sort of baseline, and I think the movie did a really good job of showing it. It's the baseline of having a place that's protected to sleep at night. It's the baseline of having a place to sit down and relax and remove chronic stress. And we know that long-term activations of stress and chronic stress have huge impacts that can actually reduce life expectancy over time. And so, you know, I hope in a sequel we would write, we would move towards what the gentleman late in the movie called the sort of the housing as a human right framework. That we would understand that fundamentally the lack of affordable housing and the mismatch of minimum wage and income to housing costs, especially in areas like the Bay Area that are so expensive, not just put stressors on families, but actually shift people's life expectancy. And so we've actually done a report on that with the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco that showed as housing cost burdens increased, what kinds of choices families had to start making. And these are the kinds of choices you can't get around, right? What we found is that people started spending 1/3 less on food. 5 times less on the kind of medical care you hope people get along the year, instead of when they file an earned income tax credit piece at the end of the year and have to hold all of their medical needs until then, and they get more challenging. And we see that cycle into issues around housing. And so all of those are really important. And once people end up on the street, we say that we see the health impacts really skyrocket from there. So I hope in our sequel we see strategies that give people a range of housing options, and that acknowledge that there are these moments and times where we can intervene before people end up on the street, and really have those programs that prevent this costly cycle that is both costly for human life and costly for us as a society, when we could intervene sooner in ways that would be both less financially expensive and better for people and families.
Thank you, Melissa. That was wonderful. So I think with the three of you, we'll start our movie production next week, and we'll write the sequel. So I wanted to add a couple of things. I mentioned earlier about our low-income housing, the area median income. In Solano County, this is not this past year's, but the year before data, I believe for a family of 4, you needed to earn in the neighborhood of $88,000 or $89,000 to not be considered low income. That typically translates to about 4 full-time minimum wage jobs. So those of us that are lucky to not have to work for minimum wage, we can all count our blessings. But if you look over the last 15 or so years, most anywhere in California, housing prices, specifically rentals, have risen over 80%, while the median income has only increased about 11%. What's not good is the fact that low income people below that area median income, their income has only increased about 2 to 4%. So you can see that huge gap, what I call the income, and then this is housing costs. And what we do at Shelter Inc. is to try to close that gap, to give people the skills to get better employment or to find housing that's more affordable for them. And it's a tough thing to do out there. So thank you all for your answers to our new movie. I can't wait to see the finished production. So what can we do at a local level to compensate for the huge cuts in federal funding over the last 40 years? We know that there's been several drivers. Back in the 1950s, there was an initiative that started by the federal government to get out of mental health and push it to the states, who were then to push it to the local communities. We know that quite a few years ago, the state of California closed half of the mental institutions. And in some cases, rightfully so. They were horrible places to be housed. They did not show dignity and respect for the people that were there. There was improper care. But at the same time, that pushed out everybody to the streets. And then what happens? If you have people that are mentally ill on the street, they get involved in crime, and they end up in the local city or county jail, and it's a revolving door for those people. So we've seen that. Redevelopment went away quite a few years ago. That depleted our housing stock as more people came into California. As I mentioned earlier, we're about 3 million units short. And as Chuck mentioned, and I'm glad you mentioned this about the movie, the opening in Denver. I've done quite a bit of work in Denver in the snow there, and it is cold outside. And to just go and sweep the streets, where are these people going to go? We have to give them options that not only shows them dignity, but our society can embrace as well. So Dawn, can you talk about how we replace some of that federal funding so we can have a more equitable society?
You know, actually, if you don't mind, John, I'd like to kind of punt this one to our council member, particularly because it's really been his leadership on the council that's really been helping to drive this for the city of Fairfield. So if he wants to intro it, I'm happy to piggyback.
I think Chuck is aching to speak here. I can see it on his face.
Yeah, thank you, Don. And if I stumble or I give you a wrong figure, let me know, because this is Don's job. The city gets their money basically from two different sources. One is sales tax, of course, and one is property tax. And our general fund is about $120 million out of a total budget of about $325 million. We just committed, probably within the last, Don, month, probably close to $2 million of that. And you get criticized. People don't understand that, yes, we're going to give you a place to stay and it's free, and no, they don't have to work. And so there's a large segment of society that thinks they should get nothing because they don't work. Then there's the other segment of society that says, no, you need to give more. And we take from a piece of pie. All the money's in that pie. So if we plus somewhere, we have to show where we're going to take it from. It's not extra money. You know, one of the things that really concern me is we talk about what we're going to do today and the reasons why we got here. But in my mind, one of the biggest things that we need to do is stop the new homeless people from happening. And specifically, and I've talked about this before, take foster youth. They term out at age 18. A lot of them have jobs or going to school, but at 18 they're kicked out from whatever home they had. And what we're doing is graduating our new class of homeless people. So we have to stop what we've got, and we recognize that. The city spends, in addition to the $2 million that I just talked about, just cleaning up, probably about 1.3 million a year. Well, this starts to add up, and millions roll off our tongue, but it starts to really add up. So how do we stop going forward? And you mentioned children, and this is an area that is so critical, because if we don't, in 10 years or 15 years, folks just like us are going to be having the same conversation. So that's the biggest thing. And Dawn is tapped in. She knows the federal funding. She knows HUD. She knows the state. So Dawn, I'm going to punt it back to you and just go ahead and extrapolate off the figures, the base figures that I gave.
Well, and yeah, just to piggyback on the council members' comments, $2 to $3 million in a $200 million budget may not seem like a lot, but when local municipalities are really here to provide public safety response, to make sure your water turns on and off, and that a policeman and a fireman show up in an emergency. Cities were really never really equipped to be providing services for homeless. But one of the takeaways that I really took away from the documentary that I thought was really fascinating and is so telling is the cost of affordable housing and how that has created such a domino effect going back, I think, to the 80s, I think it was. And today, for California at least, for Fairfield to create one affordable housing unit, and when we say affordable, we're not even talking somebody that's making minimum wage. We're talking a teacher, an entry-level administrative person in local government. So we're talking working people with higher than minimum wage jobs in an affordable housing unit. One unit costs an average of $450,000 to create, with funds that cities don't have, right? I mean, so, and as soon as a neighborhood, we all have to deal with the NIMBYs. So as soon as a neighborhood hears, oh my gosh, those people are going to come to my neighborhood. Oh my gosh. So, and then our poor council gets beat up and threatened, and oh my goodness. So it's really interesting. And I was so glad that it came up in the documentary about that, because had we been able to control it, I think years and years ago, we wouldn't be in a place today where trying to play catch up on something that I just don't know how we can do in California anymore, because we can be committing $2 million to shelter services But until we can be moving them out, in particular to Michelle's point, if we're not moving them out of shelter services and putting them into someplace that's stable and safe, we're not really solving the problem. I don't know if that answered your question. But.
I think it's close enough for now. So Melissa, I have a question for you because you work with the governmental health agencies. So about 2 years ago, I met with the CEOs of Kaiser, Sutter, North Bay, and Partnership Health Plan in Fairfield. And the discussion was about homelessness. The issue that hospitals have is that revolving door. Somebody who's homeless comes in. We know they can amount to a significant amount of funds. In another county, we had one individual that over 10 years cost the county $17 million. That's $1.7 million per year. These are called high utilizers. Every community has them. You know, something happens, they get the ambulance ride, they go to the ER, they stay there a few days, they come out. Sometimes they're going into the ER 5 days a week. So what do you hear from those governmental agencies that are responsible for healthcare? How do they view the homeless problem, and what are they doing about it?
Yeah, I think people view it in maybe two phases is the way to say it. One, I think, is the phase that the councilman was just talking about, which is this idea of preventing more homelessness, right? And I think we have a big opportunity for that right now. All across the Bay Area, COVID-19 eviction moratoriums were passed because so many people lost income during the pandemic. We saw the lowest income people lose up to 40% of their income in a matter of weeks. And we know that a lot of people don't have the savings to recover from that. And the federal government has put forward to California $4.6 billion to pay that back rent. We've had a whole process running across California, including in Solano County, really focused on making sure that rent relief gets out to people, and it's been a little slow. There's a set of things that can happen on the government level that we put a report out about. BARHII, Housing Now, and Policy Link have a report that we've put out that talked about the ways to quickly fix getting that rent relief out, and the need to extend the eviction moratoriums that are in place, many of which expire at the end of this month until that rent relief is out, so we don't have a whole new wave of evictions. So that's one good first step, and that will affect a lot of families as well as singles. And then the second piece is really chronic homeless, and in the case that you're talking about, what we call people who are high utilizers of the healthcare system, right? They sometimes can be also high utilizers of the highly engaged in the law enforcement system. Both healthcare and law enforcement and incarceration systems are very, very expensive. Much more expensive than providing the wraparound services and housing supports that you do at Shelter Inc. And so there really is a financial incentive for healthcare agencies and for local governments that are paying for incarceration to figure out strategies for those clients who keep returning. And there's interesting models for that. There are some models where people have identified these are the high utilizing people. It's confidential to the people working on these things, but these are the high utilizing people in our system. What are the sets of supports we can get them in order to keep them out of the ER? And actually, there's been a series of these whole person care experiments conducted across the state, meaning program innovations. Experiment's the wrong word. And these program innovations have shown that you can save a lot of money in the systems if you get people the kinds of wraparound and support services you talked about that you provide at Shelter Inc. And so I think that's the wave of the future for that kind of work. And there's really important work being done at the state level right now to incentivize that for healthcare, to do more and more of that.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, I think you hit on some key points. One of them was actually outlined in the movie, basically the cost benefit analysis, as well as the return on investment, to use some for-profit terms and a nonprofit societal issue here. that it's true. I know we partnered with the sheriff's office to get some dollars from the state for the jail in Fairfield. And unfortunately, we didn't get the funding, but the concept was great. And it was about that revolving door into the criminal justice system, you know, basically crimes of survival, which many of them are. And how do we get those people from, you know, not going around and around? And the same thing with the hospitals, right? They come in, how do we get them into something like a shelter or permanent supportive housing? I know when we started up Shelter Solano in Fairfield, we were making multiple 911 calls a week. And I'd mentioned earlier about our partnering with other agencies. We partnered with Toro University, and they came over on a weekly basis. They'd take blood pressure, you know, check for hypertension. You know, we have people with a lot of the chronic illnesses like asthma and diabetes, and made sure that they could get engaged not only to get Medi-Cal, if that's what was needed, but also to get the medicines that they needed. And we have one person dedicated to managing the medicines at Shelter Solano for exactly that reason. So I really appreciate what you said, Melissa. That was great. So, you know, there's a lot of information the public does not know. You know, we talked about, you know, the homeless, and what people don't realize is a lot of the homeless, they are or were your neighbors. You know, the average of sort of out of county people that are homeless in your county, and this is pretty consistent across the United States, 85% of the people are local, and they've been local. They've been living there for years. They may have been born there, right? And only 15 are quote unquote from out of town, right? People normally stay in places where they know and it's comfortable, right? So these are our neighbors, formerly and hopefully in the future as well. But what do you believe we can do? You know, we all saw the movie and the issues they raised, but what can we do at our local level to educate the public at large on the need for the services that all of the agencies like Shelter Inc. in Solano County can provide?
Hey, John.
Hey, Chuck.
Yeah, hey, let me take a stab at this. What people know about homeless or homelessness is what they see with their own eyes, local shopping centers, back alleys, tents, occasionally in the newspaper, violent calls that might make the newspaper. And it's just a general lack of what we as a city and nonprofits and faith-based try to do. It is very, very expensive. And here's what usually happens, especially with the chronic homeless, is they first have police contacts. And if there's something wrong with them, they go to North Bay or Sutter or Kaiser. And this is exactly what the officer's probably trying to do, is that if the hospital will take them and then I'm free. If the hospital won't take them, what do you do with them? Criminalization of homelessness actually is starting to subside, at least in this county. I can certainly talk about that, because they're not going to book them into county jail. So where are you going to take them? So you ask, going forward, what can we do? We need a mental health facility. And by that, I'm talking about something that is, I wouldn't know, 40 million, 50 million, whatever it takes. A large facility for people that need the help. They need basically 24/7 help, so they can at least right their ship, so then they can start taking advantage of services that Shelter Inc. offers. But we've got to get them stabilized. And how do you do that? So we need money. And of course, we want to go to the county. And the county is basically in the same position we are, because money flows from the feds, the state, to the county, to the cities. And people, whether they like it or don't like it, hopefully they will understand that this is part of the process. And like I said, you take the most vulnerable, the ones that are going to die, or the ones that are going to hurt somebody, and we help them immediately. on the back end now, and let's say all this is a panacea and it comes to fruition, where are they going to go? And this is where Melissa and Don were talking about is you need the housing, and everybody looks at low income housing, and Don, you hit it on the head, or affordable, and they're like, we don't want those people here. And I said, oh, you don't want the grocery store worker, you don't want the rookie firefighter, the teacher, the rookie cop. We know that the average cost of a house in Fairfield, the median, is almost $500,000, and that just kind of rolls off the tongue, $500,000. And John, you hit the nail on the head when you're talking about rent. I don't know what rent costs here for a one bedroom, probably in the area of $1,400, $1,500, depending on where it is, and goes up from there. $7, $8, $15 an hour is not going to get it. So I try to pick my battles because I can't battle what minimum wage should be. I can't battle who the hospital should take. Our battles start local, on the sidewalk, downtown Fairfield, North Texas. What are we going to do with these people, and where are we going to put them while folks like us and everybody else that's involved in this tries to find a recipe so we can stop it and then make things better? And I hate to ramble on, but this is the most important part. This is Fairfield or Solano County. We used to think, well, what was good for Fairfield was good for Fairfield, and who cares about the rest? Those ideas are gone. We've formed a coalition because what is good for us is good for Suisun, Vacaville, the other cities, because they too suffer homelessness. Unfortunately, we're the county seat, so people expect a lot of services here, and there are services, they're just not enough. Probably housing, whether they're tiny homes, ADUs, one bedroom, SROs, whatever it is, whatever it takes, we need to do, or nothing is going to change. And where Shelter Inc. comes in, where faith-based community comes in, the nonprofits, is they just keep hammering this message. And like I said, some people won't like it, but sometimes the truth is hard to accept, but this is the truth. So thanks.
Thank you, Chuck. That's very poignant, I think, in terms of what all of these issues are in terms of housing. I know when we first started operating in Solano County, the vacancy rate was less than 1%. The fires that occurred over several years, a lot of people moved into Solano County. And I know that in our programs, housing people, we've seen it as well. There just isn't enough affordable housing at any rate along the way. So I had some audience questions I'd like to turn to quickly and just respond to some of those. Let me look at my chat here. Someone asked about what we think about the tiny house village near the Oakland Coliseum. And there's another one for the TAY population, that's transitional age youth. I'll tell you my opinion about tiny homes. I like the idea that people can become sheltered. That's good, but it's very difficult to have small tiny home villages and places and be able to provide all the wraparound services. So it helps to solve one of the things that we're concerned about, people living on the streets and dying on the streets, due to the cold or not getting the services they need. But it's very difficult with our limited resources, and when I say we, I'm talking about any nonprofit agency, with our limited resources to give enough attention to people if they're scattered around, right? That's a very difficult problem.
Can I add to that though?
You may.
I'm going to disagree with you just a little bit, John. Respectfully, of course, but that's something that we've been looking to do in Fairfield on and off for several years now, particularly because of the cost savings and the number of the volume as well, and also the ability to develop them in a much quicker time frame to get them up and available. But where I would push back on just a little bit is the population that I think that they would be able to serve. I think that they would be able to serve low level of care, stabilized mental health clients, you know, seniors on a fixed income, college students, you know, people really looking at living in a small footprint. You know, as the council member referenced, you know, we're really looking at working regionally with our other jurisdictions. And one of the things that we're looking at is where we have land and you have funding and you have case management. Well, let's pull it all together. And this might be an opportunity such as, you know, a tiny homes or a tiny village or pallet shelters or something like that, where you can provide those wraparound services, and the level of degree would be depending on the population you're serving. So it could be very minimal, it could be nothing, and they don't have to look like shacks. I mean, we've done a lot of research, I know you have too, and there's some really nice communities out there. So I think they're pretty cool.
Right. I'll share my experience with it, or I guess my preference. I agree with you. There are some people we're actually working with a developer right now of 6 little tiny homes for mothers with children, and how we would incorporate our services into this tiny village. But I'm not sure if I mentioned it earlier, but we own 10 properties, Shelter Inc. does, and almost 100 units of housing in those properties. We have land. And one of the things that we've looked at, because some of them, one of is like a really old motel, and I mean really old, like pre-World War II, and, you know, bulldozing those, but using the land. There are modular homes that literally, once you get the base, in other words, you know, your concrete platform and your utilities plumbed, you can have a 40-unit apartment building, single room housing, in literally a month. They just come in and stack them up. They're ADA compliant, right? Right now, they're not cost effective for us as an agency, but in partnership, you know, with government agencies and what we do, we think that is a really viable solution. And they come in multiple sizes, anywhere from less than 200 square feet to almost 400 square feet. And one of the ones I visited not too long ago reminded me of getting on a Virgin America flight, just the colors that were there. It was quite exciting. And they have little kitchens, they've got showers. You know, it's like, you know, one of your better trailers if you went camping in, with a fold-out bed. So we're looking at serving a lot more people and making, at least for our land, very efficient use of it. But I agree with you, Don, that I think there are some particular circumstances, but the vast majority of people we serve, unfortunately, that's not them. So that's where I'm coming from on that. Melissa, did you have a question, or did you want to add to that?
Just that I think there are ranges of solutions, and I think for different moments in people's lives, there are ranges of solutions. And so there's an interesting program in the South Bay focused entirely on young people aging out of foster care. Right. And they have a spectrum of services, and some of them are housing that really is together, more supervised, and more intensive supportive services. And their goal is to graduate them from that to something that feels more like if you went away to college, to school, and you had one roommate and you're operating together, up into something that's fully independent living and in the range of incomes that a young person can be expected to have at those different moments in their lives. And so this to me, I think is in many ways the same thing. What are the range of housing options we provide as a community that people can access at different ranges of the income that jobs pay in our local communities, in order to ensure that everybody has access to safe, stable housing. And I think because so many people are working and still in this crunch and still ending up, you know, living in their car and then going to work in the morning, I think we really do need that full range of options. And some people are prepared to be in more independent spaces, and some needing more support.
John, to make a point, I don't know how many people are watching this, but how many of the people even know what Shelter Inc. looks like, the physical compound? Can you just describe it For them,
Okay, so Shelter Solano is our navigation center in Fairfield, but it serves all of Solano County. It's a 3.5 acre campus. We have an administrative building. We have a men's building that consists of a couple of dorms, plus common areas and areas for case management to meet one-on-one with our participants. We have apartments. These are 2-bedroom apartments, no kitchens in them. And if we had to, we can put 2 bunk beds in each bedroom of the apartment. So theoretically, you could fit 8 people in there. So those apartments are used. We have one program that uses 3 or 4 of those apartments. And this is more of a sober living environment. So people that have had intense substance use problems and now they're living in a very sober place. They don't use anymore, whether it's alcohol or other drugs. We put families in the apartments. Sometimes it's just a father with several children. We had a family a while back, and this goes to what one of you said. The father was a manager of a grocery store, right? The apartment that he and his wife and 2 children lived in changed hands, and they increased the rent $600 a month. They could no longer afford it. They didn't have savings to instantly move and do the first, last, and deposit. So they came to our shelter and were there for about 4 months while they were able to save their money, right, to be able to get into their own housing. So we see, a number of folks that are just priced out of the market in that way. So we have, I mentioned the men's dorm, we have the apartments. The women's area is a little bit different. While we still have the dorms for the women there, we also have 6 suites. And those suites are for women with children. Oftentimes, these women have fallen on hard times. They may have had their children taken away from them. We have an area for the children that may have been put into temporary foster care, can come back, and they can, over time, they can reunify with their children, which is a really great thing. And so our case managers are huge advocates in terms of getting the families back together. I think it was a year and a half ago, we had a mother come in who had a substance use issue. She was 8 months pregnant, but she also had a 10-year-old son. And the stipulation, she worked for the county, and the stipulation was, she needed to have a sober place where she could live, and after she gave birth, where she could reunify with her older son. And we were able to place her and her 2 children into housing. I think the tiny one was at the crawling stage, so probably about 8 or 9 months, right? In one of our shelters, we have a whole room dedicated to diapers. That's how many children we serve.
And see, that makes the point when we were talking tiny homes, and Melissa also hit on it. It depends on your circumstances.
Right.
And that's probably one of the hardest things for people to understand is tiny homes, and they don't look bad. But the bottom line is they fit what we need, and it's safety. And you hit on it a little bit, but we haven't really taught case management or mental health workers, and those things will follow. It's not, we're going to give you a place. It's not going to be a frat house. Obviously, we will follow up with it. But if we don't have a place to put them, you can't have a counselor go under a bridge once a week and ask somebody, hey, how you doing? And, you quitting drinking or using crank, and that's not going to work. So right. You got to get them together. You got to get them housed. I think we're on track to do that. Obviously, we'd like to do more. Money is the issue, but with partnerships come good outcomes, and and I would probably tell you this is you make partners, and whether it's partners with nonprofits, other agencies, how about we make partners with the community? And we do that through faith-based, but even get them to grudgingly admit, okay, I don't like homelessness and I don't want to give money, but I understand I have to do it, unless and until, because nothing's going to change. And I think that's probably the biggest thing. And you talk about what we looked at, the invisible class, and you remember when we talked the other day, I said, you know, that documentary was mistitled because they are not the invisible class. They are now the most visible thing that anybody in society sees, especially in the Bay Area. So how do we help them? How do we, well, housing, and that's where it's at. And so you're right. And the reason, like I said, the reason I wanted you to discuss what you had is I've had so many people say 3.5 acres and now, of course, you know, the commercial kitchen, and yeah, absolutely. These people deserve dignity, and they deserve anything that you and I get, and,
Right.
and you provide it. And so, and like I said, so do others. It's just we need more. We need more. Can I have more, please? So, thanks, John.
Quite welcome, and thank you for your comments, Chuck, as always. So I want to get back. We're coming upon the hour mark, and I want to get to a couple more of the audience questions. People say that the homeless choose to be homeless. How do you reconcile that with the amount of effort and dollars people are expending to get people off the streets? So I've talked too much already. Who wants to field this one?
I would love to actually, can I just take a little stab at that one? You know, I can speak to my own experience, of course, working in homeless services and with our homeless intervention team here, and, you know, so my many years of community advocacy. And, you know, there are people that do want to live outdoors and live off the grid? Yes. A majority, and when I say a majority, 90% of the people that we've worked with, again, there is a reason that they got where they are, and that's the reason that we have to try to assist them with. It wasn't a choice that they made, a conscious choice that they made, and that's the why that we have to try to help address. And that's the work that Melissa does. That's the work that our council member does. Is there a handful of them that choose to live off the grid in a conscious way? Yes. But a majority of them, I would say absolutely not.
Yeah. And I would say, you know, it's particularly, I have a lot of data from right before the pandemic on homelessness, and one of the biggest growing groups we saw of homelessness were seniors, people 50 plus, homeless, in fact, for the first time. And when you start to dig into the data, there's some really good work from the University of California at San Francisco that really shows that there are a few things that happened right before that. They were living with someone, a partner, a family member who passed away, and they had maybe, and the loss of that additional income or meant that they no longer could afford rent. They or their partner became very seriously sick and either couldn't work or had very significant medical bills. And then just a handful of other things, all life circumstance things that many people could find themselves in. And when you when your income is so on the line of what you can afford for housing, just creates a real crisis in life. And often had not a huge family, right? So people had passed away, they didn't live nearby, those kinds of things to fall back on as a support system. And so I think there's a lot of work we can do, and there's a lot of work out there about what happens to someone before they end up on the streets, and all the things they've tried before they end up on the streets. The people they've stayed with, the people they've been able to give them a little bit of help for a little bit of time and then couldn't afford to do it anymore. And so people really do work hard, many people, to stay off the street. And I think that sometimes it's helpful to see those stories and data to understand that more.
So let me get to another question here. There was a question, see if I can find it here. It may have scrolled off the page. Oh, the eviction moratorium. That was the question. So some of the counties in the Bay Area are extending them. The CDC, I believe it was yesterday, and the Biden administration extended the moratorium one more month, so through the end of July. So that's nationwide. Contra Costa County extended it to September 30th. And there are other counties in the Bay Area that are considering similar proposals. So it's one of those things where it all depends on where you're living. But we certainly know, given the 10,000 plus people that contacted us for some rent relief funds, that it's going to be a huge problem. We've heard we're part of the state's what's called ERAP, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, where we help facilitate people getting into the state system. And with that, what we've found out is, and we get on these calls with like 600 agencies throughout the state. And through that, what we've heard back from many, many tenants is the landlords don't want to take advantage of the program. They'll get 80% of their rent, but obviously they wouldn't get the last 20% because they think that these tenants are not worthy tenants. If they lost their job, they want tenants who have steady jobs. And of course, this is predominantly in the low income areas. So it's just going to make things worse. Let me see if I can get another question here. Talk amongst yourselves while I'm going through this here.
I'll just say, and the issue is not just lost jobs, but lost wages. So many people hourly work, and there were so many hours lost during the pandemic that there are people who have back rent who are now back working, but not working, earning enough money to pay that level of back rent. And so there are many people who this one-time infusion can keep them housed and prevent an eviction. And that's really ideally what's going to happen from this very substantial rent relief that needs to get out to folks.
And that's a big thing too, is getting that information out. Over the weekend, I was contacted. There was a veteran, a female veteran, PTSD, and needed $1,500 or was going to be thrown out of her apartment. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute, because I mean, there's still the moratorium. And bottom line was, I got a hold of Senator Dodd's office, and Ron Turner picked it up, one of his aides, and they knew exactly what to do, partnered with Catholic Charities and made a couple of phone calls. And that's probably the biggest thing, is that people just don't know what to do. And as far as, is the moratorium going to expire? Maybe not. Eventually it will. And the bottom line is they're going to throw everybody out? I don't think so. And if they do, well, I couldn't even begin to imagine that. But getting the information out and actually working, now it's up to a landlord. You want to take the 80%, or what's 100% of nothing? Again, you might not like the facts, but those are the facts. So find another question, John.
This will be the last question, and then I'll make some closing remarks. This audience member says, I always want to help the homeless I see on the street. I've been told that giving out food and clothes and money can make things worse. Does the panel have suggestions for the best way for individuals to help and make a difference? Okay, Don, I see your hand raised.
That is a fantastic question. It really is, because there are a lot of really giving people in our community, and we would never, ever want to change the big parts of people. We also want to try to direct those good intentions to probably the most efficient avenues. And so that's why I say it's a great question. So a couple of years ago here at the city, we actually started a campaign called A Hand Up, Not a Handout. And the intention of the campaign was, a public education campaign, was really for folks in our community that want to help in some way, was to get them directed if they wanted to donate food or money or resources or their volunteer time, is to get those donations to those direct service providers that are providing the services to our homeless and vulnerable folks in our community. And then on the other side of that, we wanted to really start focusing then on getting our homeless directed to those resources where they have all, you know, they have funding, they have clothes, they have meals, they have a full food pantry because of the donations from the community. Because if we continue to bring it to them, we have to think about, okay, is there an incentive then for them to really want to get in and accept services? So if we can get them instead to get into our shelters, get into talking to our service providers, then that's an opportunity for us to then take advantage of that time and talk to them and say, hey, you know, let's sit down, let's talk, let's see what's going on with you, and let's see if there's a way we can help. So I would love if there's a way for me to get more information to whoever that person is. I would love to do that. Or you can send me an email at dlabar@fairfield.ca.gov. I'd love to give you more information about that. It's a great question. And there's always a need. Melissa's nodding her head. I mean, she's right. There's always a need. There's always people and agencies that are looking for, you know, they're running low on supplies, or they need help cooking meals, or they need blankets or diapers. And so if we can get folks to donate those resources directly to the service providers, and let's let the service providers actually try to help our homeless then get into housing and case management.
Did you want to add to that, Melissa? Nodding your head.
I'll just say I appreciate what a giving community Solano County is, and we saw this during COVID. We saw so many people creating masks when you couldn't get any, sewing them, building them, getting them out to people. And so I just want to appreciate that, and I think Don's recommendations are great.
Great. So I want to close this out a bit here. So we were just talking about giving. I want to remind everyone that tomorrow is Sheltering's Day of Giving. That's tomorrow, June 25th. And we'll be sending out emails and social media posts out there throughout the day with links on how to support the work we do at Shelter Inc. So I wanted to make sure people knew about that. I also wanted to point out, we talked earlier about, you know, the amount of money people have. So there's a lot of reports out there that 3 out of 4 households in the nation, and it's no different locally, don't have enough money in terms of savings to suffer a financial crisis. And typically they don't have more than $500, right? And if that's 3/4 of the households in the country, right? Think about, it doesn't take a whole lot, and we saw that through the pandemic, to really for people to end up being homeless. So I think, you know, just to expand on what I said in the beginning, it's about income and affordable housing. We need to find a way to raise the minimum wage. It really, the national minimum wage, you know, if you look at it in sort of like $1960, right, it's nothing. There's no way, as Chuck mentioned, that people can afford, you know, to rent an apartment. What I'd like to do now is for each of you to come up with some closing comments, can be conclusions, or maybe about the paths moving forward. And I'll start with Melissa.
Okay. So I think moving forward, it's really helpful for community members to be talking to their neighbors about having a full range of housing solutions. And I think there's 2 ways to do that. I think actually one great way would be to host people to your home to watch the video that we all watched today,
Right.
and to be able to talk afterwards about what solutions might be, and to research and understand what's happening in your local community on solutions, and share with your local elected officials how important issues of housing are to you. And I don't think you have to have all the solutions, because you have incredible people like Dawn and others with a lot of expertise in the area. But I think it's really helpful for them when they know that there are community members out there who really care about seeing solutions advance. And so I'll offer just two to look into and think about. One are the solutions that prevent people from being homeless. We tend to call these tenant protections. And so these are things that don't actually cost very much money, but create protections for people. And these are things like ensuring that your rent can't be doubled overnight, right? Anti-rent gouging legislation, or things that make sure people have access to legal aid, so that they can find out when a landlord is telling them that they can be evicted, they can make sure that that's legally true, right? Because there are people being evicted now when it's legally really not something that should be happening. So I think making sure those things are in place are really important. And then the other thing is to think about people who are chronically homeless and the additional services they need, and really encouraging governments at the state level and at the local level to be investing in the kinds of services we know cost less over time, and help people live their best lives.
Excellent. Thank you.
And I
so
think
much.
people get convinced by their neighbors more than by the numbers. And so it's really helpful when
Yes,
people.
thank you. Thank you. Chuck,
Yeah, if I don't,
any conclusions or the path forward?
yeah, if I don't get kicked off again, you know, probably understand that it's expensive. Right now, it's expensive as hell, right? It is a lot of money. But just think what it's going to be in 10 years if we don't change what we're doing today and what we've done over the past. And I'll give you a break from, you know, the last couple of years. We didn't know. We thought, well, maybe, you know, it'll go away. And that kind of thinking has to go away, because it's not going to change unless and until. And how do you do that? In California, 27% of the homeless are basically in the United States are here. Got great weather, yada, yada, yada. And we have housing prices that are just so expensive. Please consider what we touched on earlier and what I touched on. I'm really concerned about graduating our next class of homeless people. And that is the children, whether because of their parents are homeless now, or especially at-risk youth, and the ones coming out of foster care, because there are so many in California that you don't think about, but they will be our next, unfortunately, class. So it's housing. I like what Melissa said, is talk to your neighbors. Don't be afraid. And when somebody says, I don't want them in my neighborhood, don't be afraid to be pleasant, but say, well, and then whose neighborhood? And I'll leave you with this. Council meeting a year ago, we were talking about building some apartments and allowing them, and a lady was very irate. And she said that her children would not live in Fairfield. And I thanked her, and she kind of had a quizzical look on her face. And like, what do you mean? I said, you just made my point, because your children will not be able to afford to live in Fairfield. And she got silent. And I mean, I didn't mean to put her on the spot, but she made the point for me. So pick something that you're good at, stick to your guns. Understand that not everybody's going to like you. Well, you'll get over it. It's okay. But we need housing. We need to support Shelter Inc., the nonprofits, the faith-based community. Those are the people with boots on the ground, and they're actually doing something. So I'll leave you with that. John, thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Chuck. I'll just add that at Shelter Inc., because we have so many children in our programs, we offer parenting programs as well as counseling for the parents and the children. One quick story, about a year ago, we got a letter from, I believe he was a captain in the Army in Afghanistan. He had gone through one of our programs when he was 5 years old, and he wrote us, 20 years later to thank us for, helping him escape the cycle of poverty and homelessness that his family grew up in. So, Dawn, I'll give you the last word.
Funny how I always end up with the last word. Well, and honestly, I would love to just echo Melissa's and Chuck's and yours comments, because all very bright people who definitely know what you're doing. But I think too, a really critical piece is that we, at the risk of sounding like a bleeding heart, we really have to, as a society in this country, we have to remember that our homeless, they're not invisible, and they are human beings. They're human beings, and they all have a story. And it's their stories that have gotten them to where they are, just as our stories have gotten us to where we are. And when we can look at them, like everyone else, as human beings, then it's not so easy to look down and cast judgment and call them those people and look at them as they're invisible, because it takes so much if we're really going to address this in a comprehensive way and look at the health piece, the physical health, the mental health, the racial disparity, the high cost of living. If, at the prevention and breaking this, repetitive cycle from family to family, if we're going to do this, we have to pull in all of our resources. We have to be talking. We have to continue to be talking about it and not be afraid to talk about it and not be afraid to have these difficult conversations. So I really appreciate this opportunity tonight. I look forward to more opportunities. And Melissa, you're a rock star. You're amazing. Rock star. And as are you, John and Chuck. As are you.
You notice how we were left till the last there, Chuck. So anyway, I want to thank the three of you for taking your time to come and talk to the audience, your perspective of homelessness and your reflections on the invisible class. I want to thank all the people who, I think we had something like 350, 360 people that signed up. I hope they're all watching this. And I hope that they learned something from that movie as well. And I've got a sneaky feeling that we'll be doing this again, over and over. And so we can really get the whole community behind us going forward. So thank you all. Have a great rest of the evening. Take care.
And what is tomorrow, John?
Oh, geez. It's our day of giving. We'll be sending out emails. And we'll be on social media. We're on all the social media sites. Just look for Shelter Inc. Make sure, though, that you see our logo. There's a lot of shelters out there around the country, and we're not an animal shelter. We're a people shelter, right?
That takes animals. That actually takes animals. Yes.
We do take animals at our shelter. You're correct.
Thank you, John.
Okay. Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye, Melissa. Bye, Chuck.
Bye. See ya.
Thanks.